Good afternoon and welcome to Meet the Makers. It's a World Channel discussion this afternoon. My name is Tina Martin. Many of us recognize that song. When Dolly Parton sang 9 to 5, she was doing more than just shining a light on the fate of the American working woman. Parton was singing the true story of a movement that started with 9 to 5, a group of secretaries here in Boston in the 1970s. Their goals were simple. They wanted better pay, advancement opportunities, and the end to sexual harassment. But their unconventional approach to added press and actually shamed their bosses into making change. So today we are going to talk to 9 to 5, the story of a movement filmmaker, Julia Reichert. We will also meet the 9 to 5 actual members of the movement, which is very exciting. Ellen Cassedy is here. Janet Selcer is here. Dorine Levasseur is here. And Dorine Levasseur, who's the Executive Secretary Treasurer of the Greater Boston Labor Council, will join us for a Q&A towards the end of the event, which we really hope you participate in. Before we get started, I want to just talk to you about how Zoom works. We're all in this Zoom world since really this time last year. You won't see yourself and you won't be able to speak during the event, but we do want to hear from you. You can ask questions by hitting the Q&A tab that's at the bottom of your screen and typing in your questions. Now, if you see a question that you really like, vote thumbs up. That will push that question up to the top and we will do our best to make sure that we get an answer for you. Zoom has also rolled out recently an auto captioning feature that we want to make sure that you're all aware of so that all participants can enjoy today's event. So here are the instructions to do that. To turn on the closed captioning feature, you're going to click on the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. Two transcript displays options will pop up. We recommend that you select subtitle, and that will enable captioning at the bottom of your screen. You can also select full transcript, and that's a sidebar window that opens up so you can see what each of the speakers is saying. Please bear in mind that closed captioning might be slightly delayed. We would like to introduce right now Julia Reichert. Julia is a 4-time Academy Award nominee and Oscar winner for her work on the working class, on gender, on race. She's based in Ohio. Julia and her partner, Stephen Bogner, have directed and produced many important documentaries, including The Last Truck, Union Maids, and American Factory. In 2020, they received an Oscar for American Factory. We're going to show you this very short clip of the 9 to 5 film, and then we will start with a conversation with Julia Reichert.
As secretary, you need to be the best you can be.
This group of women whose voice was not being heard.
There's something you can do about it. Everything exploded.
The movie was married to a movement.
They built their own kind of feminism, and it was powerful. I'm not just a secretary, I'm a secretary.
And to watch 9 to 5, please log on to worldchannel.org and enjoy the entire film. But right now, let's welcome Julia Reichert. Hi, Julia.
Hi, thank you. It's great to be here.
Yes, thank you so much for coming and for talking with us, spending some time with us. So let's get right into it. How did you come about this 9 to 5 documentary?
Yeah, I'd love to tell you about that. I understand there are some film students on this discussion, and I want to definitely address some of that. But I actually first wanted to say, I'm so excited. This is Women's History Month. We got ourselves a month. Yes. And last week was International Women's Day, March 8th, which if you look up the story of how that got started, it's a working women's holiday, and it's kind of a radical holiday. Mm-hmm. I was on the phone last night with 100 social studies teachers in New York State. And one of them said right away, I teach history, but women are not in the story that much. So they were very sort of grateful that they had an opportunity. And I think that goes to the heart of why I've wanted to make these films over my career about women in history, because we have to be kind of rediscovered. And we were there. Yeah. We were obviously there, but up till recently, really the last couple of decades, it hasn't been too much, focused on. So how did I get to 9 to 5? Well, I feel like for me, and I think for a lot of the best documentaries, a person making the film has a real personal connection. Either they care about it so much and they're so curious about it that it will keep them curious throughout the long process of making a film. Very long, very hard process. Or they have a unique kind of access for one reason or another. In this case, I kind of had both. When I was coming of age as a young feminist, right, and we started using that word when I was coming of age in college, the women's movement was just starting, but I'm also a working class kid. I grew up in a union family. My dad was Republican, but he was a union man, which meant we had a secure life. We didn't have to worry about paying bills. We didn't have to worry about, we needed the car fixed. We got vacations. So we had a secure life. And as time has gone on, I've certainly noticed that out in the world, that secure life for working people has gone away a lot, right? We don't have that so much anymore. So I decided anyway to make some films about history, to bring up, well, how did we get unions and how did working people get a secure life? And all around me at that time, as a young person, 9 to 5 kinds of things were going on, and 9 to 5 was going on. But since it was all around, I didn't really think of that. So fast forward decades, and I realize, in talking about, the history of this era, nobody had ever heard of 9 to 5, right? And so I went to Karen Nussbaum, I went to Ellen Cassedy, some of the leaders or originators. I found out, well, it had been formed in Boston. It had been formed by a small group, 10 women, 10 people started this movement in the YWCA in Boston. And actually on this call, we have the third person who joined, Ellen. We have the first person, Ellen, and the third person, Janet. And we have never before seen, which I'm really excited about, one of the people who we interviewed for the film. But, we've interviewed lots of people and their stories didn't all make it into the film. They were all great stories. We have Dorine Levasseur, who was one of the original Boston Union leaders, and we managed to get her to come on today, and I'm very excited about that. And GBH now has a lot of archival footage that we couldn't use in the film, but they have it now, so people in Boston can see it. So we were drawn to the story. The women were great. We first thought it was going to be a short, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and we realized we had to travel across the country, find archival footage from all across the country. If you've seen the film, it's full of beautiful archival footage, but hard to find. You know why? It isn't like TV was covering groups of women having events, right? If men were out there on the picket line or shouting and protesting and, getting in trouble with the police, that might be covered. But women, as you said, Tina, the sort of passing out balloons and shaming the boss, that didn't necessarily get press right away. So anyway, I guess I'm telling you, it was personal to me, my working class background, my coming of age with the women's movement, an untold story that I felt would be very relevant to now. And that's why my partner, Steve, and I got started telling the story. And I'm so glad we did. It's a great story. I hope you get to see the film.
It is a great story. And so when we think about your very beginning, when you decided, hey, I want to tell these kinds of stories, how much of that was, you said you had, kind of a union upbringing and, you've done a lot of work on the working class, which I, certainly appreciate. When did you kind of make that decision? Like, I can use my power as a filmmaker to shine the light?
Okay, briefly, I actually started with an interest in photography. I got a little camera when I was 13 and I was just fascinated with it. I learned about f-stops and read books. Then when I went to college, there was a radio station. So I got involved as a public affairs director, as a student at the radio station. But as I was getting ready to graduate, I thought photography, film, put them together, more powerful. First film, Growing Up Female, actually in 1970 came out of that. But to be honest, I didn't think of like, I guess I'm a filmmaker. I want to be a filmmaker until the third film, which is Union Maids. I was like an activist. I felt like I'm an activist.
So you didn't see
like Karen and Ellen, actually. Karen and Ellen were activists who had their secretary job on the side to earn money. I thought I was going to be an activist, whatever that was going to mean. And filmmaking, as it turned out, I really enjoyed it. And I was drawn to it. I seemed to be pretty good at it. And, but I didn't start by saying, I want to be a filmmaker. I don't know if that's, for one thing, to be honest, Tina, there were no women filmmakers. It wasn't like there were role models that I could say, I want to be like her, or there's a path for me. It's very different now. And I'm glad it's more possible for women of color, people in general to say, I know it's hard, but I'm going to learn. I have things I want to say. I have access to some great stories because of who I am. I have real burning passion about it. It takes all those things. I don't think what it takes is like, I want to win an Oscar. I want to get my film on Netflix or PBS. You never think like that. You think, what are the stories around me that I can tell, that I have connection to? That's my answer to students.
That's a great answer. And so you said you didn't recognize yourself as a filmmaker until the third film in. Is that what you're saying?
Until we were into the third film.
Mm-hmm.
And people started saying, the filmmakers, here's Julia, the filmmaker. And I was like, oh, I guess I am. I don't know. It was not a career path that I chose. It just kind of happened. I mean, looking back, it's 50 years. And I've made both what you would call cinema verite films, like American Factory and The Last Truck, Closing of a General Motors Plant, which are both very working class cinema verite films. But then you have 9 to 5, you have Union Maids, you have Seeing Red, Stories of American Communists, which is a great film, that are all oral history films, like this one, where you're doing original research, going back and learning about a movement, learning how it got built, learning why, learning what impact it had, learning what setbacks. 9 to 5 is one thing I love about it, and we were very deliberate. We wanted to let the audience know how they did it. Not just celebrate, wow, look at all these great victories, but where were your setbacks and what were your tactics and how did you figure it out? Because that's what people, for one thing, I think it's more interesting. It's harder to make it dramatic. But it's also what people, I believe, younger people today need to know, that there are like strategies and tactics and you need to be flexible. And for instance, you don't have litmus tests about language. Mm-hmm. If people don't want to call themselves feminists, no big deal, right? If people don't agree on everything, they conform together on what they do agree on. And that's what we see in the film. So I love that about 9 to 5. It's very much a film for activists, but hopefully it's also a fun film you can watch at the drive-in.
Thank you, Julia. We are going to talk a little bit more. Don't go away. We'll come back with all the panelists towards the end there. And I know you have some really good advice for some aspiring filmmakers who are joining us today. So thank you so much. We will check back in a little bit. Thanks, Julia.
Thanks, Tina.
All right, now I would like to introduce Ellen Cassedy. Let's play a short clip.
Karen was working at Harvard. I was an experienced clerk typist, so I quickly got a job there too. One day, my boss came to me in my office and said, "I'd like you to remove the calendar from my wall." And then he went back to his office. And then I retraced his steps and went to the wall in his office and removed the calendar. I thought, what is that? Why can't he do that himself?
It was noon. There was nobody else in the office except for me. A student comes in and looks me dead in the eye and says, "Isn't anybody here? Can't you see me? I'm right in front of your eyes. I'm here."
What is going on here? We keep this place running, and yet we don't get recognized, we don't get enough money, and we want something different. We started organizing the Harvard Office Workers Group. These were 10 kind of average folks. We talked about our backgrounds and what we were experiencing on the job. Really, the truth is, you get any 10 women together and you start talking, and that's enough.
We decided to call it 9 to 5. It was an identity that was neutral. You didn't have to have any other assumptions except, oh yeah, I work 9 to 5.
Welcome to Ellen Cassedy. Ellen Cassedy started the 9 to 5 movement in Boston with Karen Nussbaum. Ellen is the author of 9 to 5, The Working Woman's Guide to Office Survival with Karen Nussbaum, and the 9 to 5 Guide to Combating Sexual Harassment. That's done with Ellen Bravo. She was a speechwriter for the Clinton administration. Ellen is an author of the book We Are Here, Memories of the Lithuanian Holocaust. She's currently writing her memoir years of 9 to 5. And let's welcome Ellen to the program. Hi, Ellen.
Hi, glad to be here.
Thank you so much for spending some time with us. I love that clip when you're saying, why can't you take your own calendar off of the wall? Was that your moment? Was that your moment there?
It was a moment. It's funny how little things can really get under your skin, whether it's the silly request about the calendar or that basic moment of disrespect, isn't anybody here? Well, I'm here. Mm-hmm. That sense that you deserve better is so revolutionary.
And so when you talk about the sense that you deserve better, what was that like back then, trying to convince everyone that they deserve better? Was that hard?
No. I think that what was happening throughout the office world in Boston at that time was women didn't necessarily see themselves as feminists, but we felt we were getting a raw deal. Our pay was lower than men's pay. We were training men to be our own supervisors. We were asked to do the silliest little things in the office. And their ideas were floating in the air. And we were picking up ideas from the social justice movements that were in the air then, the women's movement, the civil rights movement. And those ideas were seeping into the smallest corners of the office world. And the other thing that strikes me is that we had this instinct to get together, not to try to solve the problems on our own by dressing up better or taking another class, but to create a place where people could link arms and join together. And I think not everybody was a natural leader. Mm-hmm. Not everybody thought of herself as an activist. I didn't. I wasn't a natural leader, but we made a place for people with all different kinds of personalities, the people who were bold, the people who were timid, the people who were really outgoing, the people who were shy. And as Dolly Parton wrote in that song, we all felt we were in the same boat, and we linked arms and we got together.
And so I would imagine that allowing someone who's not a good public speaker to say, you know what, you can pass out leaflets. All right. So that's a way to kind of encourage everyone to participate as opposed to ostracizing them because they can't do this or that.
Right. And we set up a hotline. When we were going into a big bank or a big insurance company, women were afraid they were even afraid to put leaflets in the ladies' room because what if somebody saw them? But what they could do was they could call this number and they could say, guess what? A man who I trained has just been promoted to supervisor, or I just found out that the guy down the hall with 2 years less experience is getting paid more than I am. And then we would take that information and feed it back with leaflets that we passed out in front of the bank. And often the people passing out the leaflets didn't work at that bank. They worked someplace else. So it was safe for them to do it. So we thought of all these little ways that it was safe for people to speak up, but sort of on the sly, sort of like whistleblowers. And that combined with the way we learned how to get publicity really put the pressure on these banks and insurance companies and major Boston companies, and we made huge changes.
So when you talk about you learned how to get publicity, how did you do that?
One of the things that really helped us was that the women who were working at the newspapers and the radio stations and TV stations, they were getting the same thing that we were. So they were also frustrated. And so they had the passion. They were ready to write these stories. And when we went to visit on our lunch hour, the boss who had required a secretary to sew up his pants while he was wearing them, we got all the TV stations, and it was on the front page of the Boston Globe. So, and we tried different things. We tried issuing a report. Sometimes that worked. We tried showing up with some colorful thing. We built a coffee cup in Government Center one year. And that coffee cup, we didn't have to say anything more. It just meant, guys, get your own coffee.
Mm-hmm. A coffee cup. Wow. Okay. So you were really thinking outside of the box, even at that time in terms of, okay.
And it was really fun. We made it up. We followed our own noses. We tried to create an organization that we would want to join, that we felt comfortable in, and we welcomed people. We had so many lunches because in order to meet people, you couldn't just like waltz into the company and say, hey, anybody want to join this organization? No, you had to sort of carefully cultivate people and meet them and ask them questions about their job. And sometimes we had 3 recruitment lunches in one day. So we were out there listening to what people were saying and sort of feeding back to people what they were saying about themselves as women workers.
And a very deliberate effort, right? You talk about coffee and, when people do watch the film, they'll see, all kinds of different women from all kinds of places. And so there was an effort to kind of incorporate women of color, single women, older women, et cetera.
Very much so. That was very deliberate. And we felt that it was really important for our organization to look like the workforce that we were trying to reach. When we were starting the organization in Boston, there were very few women of color in the office workforce. They were there after hours cleaning the offices, but they were not sitting at the typewriters. Now that has changed in Boston, but we made a special attempt to expand around the country so that we could be active in cities where there was a multiracial office workforce. And we were very proud of the fact that we brought together people who were different from each other. We all felt at home in the organization, and it was such a rich experience working side by side and linking arms and all going in the same direction together.
Excellent. Thank you, Ellen. We're all going in the same direction in a few moments. We'll all join back together. So thank you so much, Ellen Cassedy. We'll check back with you in a little bit. We appreciate it. Let's now meet Janet Selcer. We're going to play a clip from the documentary introducing us to Janet Selcer.
We discovered that there were secret boss organizations. Something called the Boston Survey Group met and set wages across the board across many different corporations for office workers.
This was illegal. It's like price fixing. We started leafleting about it at the big insurance companies and the big banks, and it was very embarrassing for them.
That led to a 10% across the board pay increase and a job posting program. Victories that were very concrete. A big lesson for our members, and we made this very explicit, is your boss is organized. You better be organized too.
Let's talk to Janet. Janet, welcome. Let me read a little bit of your bio here. After getting fired from her job for starting a petition about working conditions, Janet sought out Ellen Cassedy and Karen Nussbaum and helped launch the 9 to 5 movement in 1973. She became the director and organizer of training for some of the 18 9 to 5 chapters as the organization expanded nationally from its roots. Janet founded the organization Steps to Success. That organization works with students living in public housing and their families to achieve educational equity with the end goal of ending generational poverty. Welcome so much to the program.
Thank you.
Oh, gosh, I just feel like I'm in the, presence of such greatness here. So Janet, tell me about what do you think the major success and achievement was of the 9 to 5 movement?
Well, I would say that we were able to show women that they weren't alone and that through collective action, they were able to change their working conditions. And that was something I think that people didn't really see. We were not looking for necessarily the biggest firebrand in the office. We were looking for the most respected office workers, the people that other secretaries went to when they had problems. And I think by having an organization that they could join, that some of the issues that they cared about suddenly were legitimated. We had an office workers' bill of rights that office workers helped us compile. And I think, the raised expectations that they felt by having this office workers' bill of rights and then an organization through which they had an outlet to take action made a huge difference.
And now, did you see yourself as, an organizer or a labor rights advocate before the movement?
Well, not really. I also grew up in a family where both my parents were union members, so I wasn't unaware of that. My father went on strike 2 times that I remember when I was growing up. But I was an office worker, like our members were when I came to Boston. And it wasn't until I was working at Harvard, and it's interesting to me that the 3 original staff members of 9 to 5 all worked at Harvard. In my case, I started a petition there because they were adding a lot of work to our job descriptions, and everybody thought it was unfair. So I started a petition. As a result, I got called into the personnel director's office at 5 minutes of 5 on Friday, which is when you usually get fired, and told that I didn't seem like I was happy there. Right after that, I sought out Ellen and Karen and had an idea that I wanted to change things, that I wanted to organize and, change my situation, change situations of others. So.
And so do you feel like you did that, with this movement? Do you feel like, hey, you know what? We have really, advanced the cause for women in the workplace?
I think we did. I think really we did big time. Through 9 to 5, we were able to have victories and really show the women that joined that they could have success, even though, as we'll talk about a little bit later, we knew that ultimately women needed some organization on the job to represent them, probably through unionization. Excuse me. I think that that's something we were aware of, but because women weren't organizing in that way at the time, we offered an alternative that they could join and feel like they were making progress with.
Thank you, Janet. We are actually going to come back to you in a few moments. Janet Selcer, we appreciate your time. We'll talk to you a little bit later, okay? Next, we want to introduce you to Dorine Levasseur, and this is video that has never been seen before. So let's please take a look at this exclusive video.
I was president in Boston, Local 925, and so this is the Local 920. This was the Local 925 office for, let's see, we moved here in 1979 from the YWCA, and we were here until this was still the office when I left Local 925 in 1990. So this is me in my office. I mean, we talked a lot about the kind of union we wanted to be, that we wanted to be very much, a union that was led by the members, that put the members first and out there. I mean, I learned, very early on, for example, that it was never about, if there was going to be, say, an article in the paper, that it wasn't we who would be quoted. We would always want to have the members out there. I have, when it comes to that kind of thing, and I think just from early on, how I learned it and how I came to grow in it. I have no ego when it comes to that. I don't have any need whatsoever ever to be in the spotlight for any reason whatsoever. I always feel like it's about the victory of the people who are daring. And I think that that's a big word for me, daring to really take a stand on the job on their own behalf and speak up on their own behalf. And to me, that had there was more courage and more meaning to being one of those people, to again, dare to take a stand and put oneself at risk and I think I talked about this earlier, put oneself at risk as they were, than there was in doing the work we were doing. We were only showing the way, but they were the ones taking the risks.
Dorine was one of the original 3 staff members of Local 925 SEIU to build a union for office workers in the Boston area. In 1990, Dorine became a field representative and an organizer for the Massachusetts Teachers Association, where she worked until she retired in 2016. Dorine, welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks, Tina. Nice to see you.
Good to see you as well. You talk in your clip about courage. And folks having kind of the courage to speak up for themselves. That's not easy, one. And two, how were you able to convince people to be courageous and say, in the long run, it may seem like you're making a sacrifice now, but this could work out for you at the end?
Not an easy task. I think people we really try to help people come to believe in themselves and believe in each other and believe in the power they could have together. There was a lot of fear of people losing their jobs. These were people we were meeting with who were living paycheck to paycheck. And having grown up in a family where that was the case, I knew how disastrous it could be to lose a job. So Janet talks about being fired at 5:05 on a Friday. And that was a big concern. I don't want to be fired. I'm afraid of being fired. So we built very carefully when we had an organizing drive in a company, in a school, wherever. We built very carefully, person to person, to create that sense of collective spirit, to give people courage, to give people the wherewithal to feel like, okay, we can do this together. I don't have to be alone.
And has the 9-to-5 movement empowered you to do that?
Yes, I think that, the kinds of victories 9-to-5 was having were, getting well publicized in the Boston area, and people could see that made a difference. And then along the way, there came to be some of the groups that 9-to-5 was working with, some of the people who thought, we want to take the next step. We want to do more. We want to have the right to have something to say directly with our bosses, right in our job site. And the union was the way to do that. So we taught people about what it was to organize a union and what it was to negotiate a contract. And we went from there. Again, to get people to go through all those steps, especially with the kind of resistance that we were experiencing from the bosses, it wasn't easy. So, there were lots and lots of ups and downs.
And so talk about maybe a down, just so people understand.
Yeah, well, okay, I'll talk about the union drive at Boston College, where I became lead organizer. And we had built over a fair period of time between myself and Jackie Ruff, who was the other staff person, along with Karen Nussbaum, a really solid group of people, women and men, but all in the clerical jobs at Boston College. And one would think, oh, Boston College, the Catholic institution, and they believe in the rights of working people. No, not so much. Mm-hmm. And so we worked really hard. The employer, Boston College, hired a law firm in Boston that taught them basically how to undermine the union. And where the employer had the people who were working there 8 hours a day to talk to write letters, to communicate with them on the job, it began sort of eroding the trust that people had in themselves and in each other. And I will never forget the day of the counting of the ballots of that election, when it was clear we were going to lose. It was one of the most heartbreaking days of my life, really. And I think and especially of the women who worked there. They were mostly women on the organizing committee. They were heartbroken as well. But a number of them went on to do other things. One, in fact, is now working for the auto workers, and she's doing an incredible job and has worked really hard in the Boston area.
Great. Dorine, we are going to now bring everyone back for our group conversation. Thank you so much. I would love to welcome back now Julia, Ellen, Janet, and I would love to introduce Darlene Lumbos, who is the Executive Secretary and Treasurer of the Greater Boston Labor Council. And she is the first person of color and the first woman to be elected to this top leadership position. The GBLC represents more than 100,000 union members and their families within 24 cities and towns in the region. Welcome back, ladies, and welcome back to Darlene. Darlene, we'll start with you because we are just welcoming you to our conversation. How do you implore some of the strategies of the 9 to 5 movement in today's work that you do?
So I did want to just thank Sandy Felder in particular, who invited me to be on this panel. She is one of the trailblazers here in Boston, and just wanted to again thank. I'm just honored to be on this panel. So absolutely, these are kind of tried and true organizing strategies. I mean, there's nothing you can't replace. The creativity that women have in getting to know each other, to build community together. That's actually what organizing and the labor movement is all about. So being able to see this in this film is just wonderful. And to know that Julia wanted to really show how it's done, you know, the nuts and bolts of organizing.
How it's done right.
How it's done right.
How it's done right.
How it's done right. And Julia, you know, now we're talking about the film. One of the questions that I had for you was how did you kind of determine what wasn't going to be in the film? Because there was so much great footage.
That was really, really hard. You know, a film is not like a book. It's, you know, about 90 minutes. So you got that. You've got so much great material, and you have to create a story that the audience can really follow along with. Mm-hmm. It was, what can I tell you? Here's an example of what was difficult. We had so many great union stories, how people organized. Dorine was one of those, and you could see by her clip that we shot for the film. We shot her more than almost anybody else because she was so good, talking about what it felt like to be an organizer and how you're asking people to like take risks and possibly lose their job and all these things. So when we would have test audiences, we had lots of great union stories. When we would have test audiences, most of the people who were like under 50 would say, after, you know, when we hit the union section, what's a union? I thought they were corrupt. Why? And they say they're voting. What are they voting on? What's collective bargaining? They keep talking about collective. What is that? So the audiences, we found, it was just too much. They needed a simple explanation, which we didn't realize until we were really deep into editing. And if you've seen the film, we ended up creating this little animated sequence, which one of the people narrates, which we have created totally ourselves, that tells you, what does a union mean? People getting together, voting, why? What's the National Labor Relations Board? So that was a real challenge. And we had to eliminate a lot of our wonderful union material because we had to have room to explain simply what it is, and keep to the simple stories. Like the great story in the film about women wanted to have tampon machines. The workers wanted tampon machines in their offices at a university. You know, that's something everybody could get. And it was funny. And it was something women would ask for. Yeah. It wasn't just, not that it's not important, higher pay. It was funny, and it was something that women would come up with. So I don't know. Filmmaking is hard. You got to keep it funny, interesting. You know, you got to keep it going, and it's got to be understandable to the audience.
I think you did that. You definitely did that. Well, I have to keep to my promise to participate in the Q&A. All right. We have Susan McPherson, and she asks, what encouragement can you give the women who were forced out of work during the pandemic? And this can be, I mean, is this a Darlene? Is this a Janet? Is this a Ellen or, Doreen? Whoever wants to take it first.
Well, I would just say, just because we represent so many different unions in our labor council, and there's so many women leaders in the labor movement now than ever before. And that's one of the reasons that inspired me to be part of this labor movement. And we're not going to stop. We are the labor movement, the women that are in it, the teachers that have been on strike even before the pandemic. And so we will work as hard as we've always have to build that community, to build that labor movement that is going to get, there's so many issues around pay equity, but also childcare issues. So many people from the pandemic, the women in particular, have left the workforce, and we need to be able to, as a labor movement, take leadership in making sure that we continue to make gains in the workplace and in our communities. So I would say we're here. We're still fighting, and so we define what the labor movement is, and that's us.
Aren't we in a backward country that childcare is something that every family has to figure out for themselves? I just have to say that.
And I think that's something that our organization really played a huge role in, is in taking issues that people had been used to thinking of as their own personal problems and saying, this is a policy issue. This is something government needs to be involved in. This is something that management needs to be involved in. This is something that the labor movement needs to be involved in. And so sexual harassment, pregnancy discrimination, childcare, all of these things used to be thought of as something that you just had to handle on your own.
Yeah.
Now they're not. And I think as we go forward, it's so great to hear you say this, Darlene, that these are issues that the labor movement as a whole is taking on, and that people can get together and deal with as a group.
Yeah. All right, next question. Let's see here. This is from Penny Swart, and this is actually for Doreen. Can you talk about the trailblazing strike of answering service workers and its significance in the local labor movement?
Yeah, we had, Penny was on the staff then. Hi, Penny. And there were two answering services, one in Rosendale, one in Brookline, both owned. They were had been separately owned, but then came to be owned by the same person. And this person, Joe Limerick, actually had this plan to buy up businesses with and sort of negotiate jumbo payments. And then it would come a time when the new owners couldn't make the jumbo payments, and so he would just take over the businesses. And that's sort of what happened. There were 90 mostly women across the two answering services, and they believed that they could make a difference. They had already had a real strong sense of community among themselves, and they didn't always have someone peering over their shoulders. So they actually had some really good freedom to be able to talk with each other. And that strike went on for 9 months. And it was a 24-hour picket line for a lot of that time. On the picket line, we were joined at one point by Gloria Steinem, which was pretty exciting. And but it really got a lot of notoriety, and we got help from all over the country through SEIU, and both in researching how this person did business and found his sneaky, nasty ways that were later investigated by the FBI. And also we got financial help. The sense of solidarity that these 90 answering service operators were not alone. They were part of this bigger organization that was there for them, made all the difference in their being able to hang in there.
Excellent. I'm trying to get to all these questions because we are getting quite a few. All right, this is from Ira, and she says, thanks for the conversation and the wonderful movie. I'm wondering if you could talk about the racial dynamics of the movement, which is a great question, in that time period, and how do you feel diversity and racial equity was or was not part of your mission and organizing? Ellen, Janet?
Oh, I think it was part of our mission. About 4 years into 9 to 5 in Boston, as Ellen mentioned, we were getting calls from all over the country and ended up starting chapters in cities. And those workforces in Baltimore, Atlanta, LA were much more integrated, I think, than they were in Boston, which was a time of busing and many other, forms of discrimination here. But I think that we were very concerned that both women of color and white women worked together in the organization. And it wasn't just sex discrimination, it was race discrimination as well. And so in organizing, and you'll see this in the movie, women were often paired to do leafleting together or to chair a meeting together, bringing women of color and white women together. And I mean, I feel like that is a really important factor in having unions too, is that that's often the place where people of different backgrounds, of different races meet each other and have a common enemy, if you will, have a common goal of representing themselves. And it's not the division that you see today. So when we hear that people that are much younger don't know about unions, it's alarming. And that's why we need Darlene there, because, I feel like it's one of the institutions that, can counter the kind of racism that exists in the country now.
And Ellen, did you want to say something? Because in the movie, one of the things I noticed was you guys talking about we're not integrated necessarily because we just don't hang out together, and we just have to make a way to hang out together.
Yeah,
the film,
and 9 to 5 became that way.
Mhm.
And when you talk to people who were involved in that, in those years, so many people say, it was such a rich experience for me. There were people who I would never have met any other way except through this organization, through this union. And we all realized that we had the same concerns. People we had thought of as being different from us actually turned out to be the same problems. And so that's something that an organization, a labor organization, women's organization can really do. And we feel really proud of ourselves for making that happen.
Excellent. All right, another question. How do you feel the film and Dolly Parton's song has aged over the years?
I think it's really stood the test of time. I don't know how many people know this, but the song 9 to 5 is the #1 crossover song of all time. For as long as this history has been being kept. And I think people get it more now than ever before, because they're feeling, especially in this time of the pandemic, where they're realizing how little power they have sometimes. It's really making a difference in terms of, I think, giving people the courage to want and fight for something better. And I think that's there now more than ever.
All right, another question, and gosh, our hour is almost up here. Sorry, lady. All right, Aileen says, I understand why the Boston Advisory Group and similar groups exist and could set wages. Do such organizations still exist? Excuse me, she's saying, do they still exist? And why are women from 9 to 5ers to professionals still paid less, especially women of color and Latinos? Is that a Darlene question? I'm not sure.
The question of why is pretty deep, and I think it has to do with very interesting in the film. It gave so much context for what was also happening at that time, the movement at that time, the culture at that time, and I think we're on an upswing as well, given not just the pandemic and the honoring of essential workers, but also the racial justice uprisings that we're seeing now. And so I'm not sure in terms of the why. We have had 30, 40 years of attacks on unions and trying to split us by race and class. And so if we don't recognize that we're not just having to build community within ourselves, but we're also having to fight against those bosses and those landlords and those corporate folks that are more interested in profits than they are about us. And are intentionally dividing us. So I took that last question, why? Because it is deep. It's deep in our society. It's about intentional divisions. And that's what's so great about a union, and the work that the 9 to 5 women did was to work through those divisions. And I'm not sure what the first part of the question was.
We were talking,
not even sure that you need a Boston survey group anymore. If you look at someplace like Amazon and the spread of certain corporations now, and Amazon workers in the South are organizing. But, you know, the power of those corporations has only grown, and the disparity between workers' wages and the wages of CEOs has grown tremendously.
more and more. Yeah, exactly. It's gotten, we all know the wage gap, the gap between the average worker and the billionaire class has grown and grown and grown. So it's not like sort of workers, we just want a bigger, we just want more and more, you know, like of course, like everybody's got a beef. No, I mean, the society economically has changed. As union density has gone down, the billionaire class has grown. That may or may not be connected. I think it is, personally. But the society's really changed. The sense that, you know, that the average, like in my family, you know, a lot of families, that you can have a secure life if you're a working class person. If you put in your 40 hours, you work hard, you have skills that you give over to the company, you know, you should be able to have vacations. You should be able to like own a home. Your kids should be able to go to college. That was always the American way and the American dream. And, you know, are we even further from that? I think it's something that we continue to strive for in this country and in this world.
And so we actually have to wrap up. It's almost 2:00. That was
Oh
quick.
my gosh.
Machish, Julia, you kind of just said it a little bit, but in a few minutes, maybe one or two, what are you hoping that people take away from this film when they watch?
Organize. Also, I think learn history. You know, if we don't know how people in the past have made changes, have changed history, have taken control, have made things happen, how are we, if we don't know how they did it, how are we going to know and believe that today people of Darlene's age, the people she works with, how are they going to know and believe they can do it? So I would say, don't just see 9 to 5, but see many of the incredible labor films that are available through PBS and Netflix and so forth. So you understand what your place in history can be, what your place in history can be now.
And Darlene, I'm going to give everyone a last word here. Darlene, when you look at the movement going forward, what's maybe the one takeaway that you have implored? I'm sure you've implored many from these brilliant ladies who've worked really hard to set a great foundation. But maybe the one takeaway that when you think about people like Ellen and Janet, what you kind of take with you.
Yeah, I think what I loved about the film is that it really spoke to the community organizing roots that I come out of. But then they found that the union was really the place where collective bargaining and going kind of toe to toe as a collective with a boss was actually the mechanism that would get them what they needed. And I think I've truly believed that. I think that unions are such an incredible force, have been throughout history, and I'm just proud to be part of that legacy and hope that I could honor those that have come before me. And I will continue to fight as long as it takes.
And Janet, what are you hoping with the 9 to 5 movement going forward? Is there something that, if you had a magic wand, what would it be where you said, yes, do that? Make that happen.
Well, I think PBS and this show as well has done a terrific job of getting the word out far more than I ever imagined happening. And, for me, I think encouragement for the younger generation that's doing the organizing now and being able to have a movie like this and really get out there is so important, because for us, we've run our lap and we're handing off the baton to young people that are organizing now and, spreading the word about what has happened and encouraging people that it's a long distance race, but, with persistence, we're going to win in the end.
And Ellen, what's your sentiment here moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think Julia said it well when she said that learn your history, but I would add to that, forge your own path, because every era is going to find its own way. And I guess one more thing, have fun.
Yes.
Thank you. And Dorine.
Oh, I'm going to harken back to one of my favorite books and movies, The Power of One. Not the power of one person, but the power of coming together as one, that we can and make a difference, that you can make a difference individually and that we can make a difference together. And I love the fun part. I think I have so many funny stories from, the work that I did, and the laughter always was a unifying factor.
Well, thank you, ladies, so much. This is a great way to celebrate Women's History Month. You all are Women's History, and we really do appreciate you. So thank you for spending an hour with us. For everyone who is looking to see the 9 to 5 film, please go to worldchannel.org, and you can certainly see it there. We really appreciate your time, spending your lunch break with us. Please join us on March 23rd at 2:30 for Community, Culture, and COVID in New Orleans. That's a virtual discussion with Death is Our Business with filmmaker Jacqueline Olive. It was so great to spend this time with you. We hope you have a great weekend and stay safe. Take care.